Good morning, everybody, and welcome. The number 18 is a big deal in Hebrew. The number 18 is a big number. It's got the numerical value of Chai, and the question is why? What is special about the number 18? Today's Torah study, Worldwide Wisdom, is dedicated in loving memory of Avram ben Eliyahu HaKohen, Dr. Ron Collins, on the occasion of his Shiva, which we're in the midst of. May his soul be elevated in Gan Eden. On Talmud, page 300 of Tractate Brachos and the Ein Yaakov, the rabbis taught in the Brisa. Shimon, the cotton merchant, arranged the order of the 18 blessings of the Shemona Esrei in front of Rabban Gamliel in Yavne. Does anybody remember what Yavne was famous for? Yavne is the place that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, what was it famous for? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai negotiated the safe passage of Torah wisdom from the imminent ruins of Jerusalem to the city of Yavne under Roman protection. So there Torah flourished despite the buildings being destroyed. Rabbi Gamliel was the leader of the Jewish people in Yavne. Good morning, Corey and Stacy, and to all those that are watching with us live, later, local and international. Rabbi Gamliel was the Rebbe at that time, and Shimon, the cotton merchant, arranged the order of the 18 blessings. This is a big deal. The 18 blessings is what? Is the Shemona Esrei. When you say the word Shemona Esrei or Amida means standing, Shemona Esrei means 18. Both of them are synonymous names of the pinnacle of prayer, of the daily three daily prayers, which is morning, afternoon, and evening. They all reach the pinnacle of when we stand with our feet together before God in humble request. We ask God for 18 blessings. So that's why that Amida prayer is called Amida, because it means standing. And it's also called Shemona Esrei, which means 18, because it's got 19 blessings. Makes sense, right? No, it doesn't make sense. It's really called 18 because it's got 18 blessings, but then the rabbis added one more blessing. What was that extra 19th blessing? That blessing was added for the self-hating Jews. I'm serious. It was added for the self-hating Jews, which was added here. I'll read it to you. It's the 19th blessing, and it goes as follows. Let there be no hope for informers, and may all the heretics and all the wicked instantly perish. This is not a prayer against anti-Semites. It's against Jews that have fallen off the wagon. May all the enemies of your people be speedily extirpated, and may you swiftly uproot, break, crush, and subdue the reign of wickedness speedily in our days. Blessed are you, Lord, who crushes enemies and subdues the wicked. Gentiles are not called wicked. They're just doing what they do. It's the Jews who fell off the wagon that are called wicked. And that's why we make that 19th blessing. So we're going to call this the 18 blessings because it was a little later that the 19th blessing was added, when under the Roman rule, the self-hating Jews rose to power and the rabbis needed to institute a special prayer to bring them down. So self-hating Jews is nothing new. Just bear that in mind. It's in the prayer. And if you believe that there's certain Jews that need to be turned, then pray that prayer with intention. We're not praying for the destruction of the wicked. We're praying for the removal of the wickedness from within them. Actually, it's going to be interesting insight to think about that. Hold on. Are we praying for the downfall of the wicked? It's arguable. Whatever, depends on how you interpret it. Either way. So, Rabbi Gamliel asked the sages, is there anyone who knows how to institute the blessing of the heretics? Oh, here it is. Shmuel Hakatan stood up and he instituted it. The following year, when Shmuel Hakatan went to serve as prayer leader, he forgot the text of the blessing. And he looked into it, trying to remind himself of its exact wording. The wording of the blessing that he himself had instituted for 2 to 3 hours while standing as the prayer leader. And during that time, they did not remove him as prayer leader. I guess he was scratching his head, trying to figure out what was the text of the blessing against the heretics, against the self-hating Jews that he himself had instituted. Now, he's up there on the bima for 2 to 3 hours, and he can't remember the blessing, and they haven't replaced him. What's going on over here? Right? What's happening? Sounds like drama in the yeshiva. The Gemara asks, why did they not remove him? Why? Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, if the prayer leader makes a mistake in any of the blessings of the silent Amida, we do not remove him. However, if he made a mistake in the blessing of the heretics, then we do remove him. Why? Because we suspect that he's one of them. We suspect that perhaps he is a heretic. Thus, we suspect that he did not want to curse the heretics, so as not to curse himself. There was severe drama in temple times when Jews who were unscrupulous made it to the highest echelons of power. For example, the high priest, can you imagine the high priest, was now instituted as, appointed as the leader of the Jewish people, and he's the only person going into the Holy of Holies on the day of Yom Kippur. And he's doing so with insincere intentions because really he was a heretic. Right? These were positions that were purchased, acquired from the Roman government. Right? So here he goes and he walks into the Holy of Holies. Now, what happens if you have an insincere thought in the Holy of Holies? Tight, drop dead. In a period of about 80 years, they had about 60 or 70 high priests because they would keep on dropping like flies. It's a very interesting concept for us to learn one day as to why these people wanted this position, that they weren't really going to outlive more than 1 year. It's an interesting concept. But there was this infiltration into the highest echelons of spiritual Jewish leadership, as there is today, of people.
Sounds like politics in Chicago.
Right. Sounds like politics in Chicago. The Gemara answers, so why did they not remove him? Shmuel Hakatan was different because he himself had instituted the blessing a year earlier. Thus, there was no reason to suspect that he himself was a heretic. The Gemara asks, but let us be concerned that perhaps he changed his mind and became a heretic later on. You know, here in America, there's this position, there's this mindset that we say that if somebody believed something once, then they can never, ever, ever, ever change their mind. It's an amazing concept that I, as a naturalized citizen, can't ever wrap my mind around. You know, we'll dig up, remember Brett Kavanaugh? So because he said something in college, therefore, he must be believing the same thing today. Right? Done. Obviously, I mean, like, who would have ever thought of a concept that somebody could actually change their mind? Doesn't, if somebody was like anti-Jewish, 50 years ago, then it means he's an anti-Semite right now. And like, why does that have to be? It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's literally putting a human being into a box and saying, you cannot change. We're voting for you because you have no mind of your own, because you're incapable of evolving. And that is obviously an absolutely ridiculous and absurd approach. Here with Shmuel, they asked, okay, so a year ago, he instituted a blessing against the self-hating Jews. Good. Got it. But maybe in the interim, he became a heretic himself. Like, why not? Why couldn't that happen? We have to understand why he forgot the prayer. We're going to go back in a moment. I'm just keeping the flow of the story here. The Gemara answers. Abaye said, I have a tradition from my teachers that a good person does not become bad. Ooh. That a good person does not become bad. Ain't that interesting? Have you ever heard of a good person becoming bad? Mm-hmm. You have? Actually, you can think of someone.
Good person what?
A good person who became bad. I guess anybody who becomes bad started off somewhere as a good person, I imagine. Right. They weren't born bad. So what is this supposed to mean? I mean, nobody's born evil, like born a Nazi. I mean, I wouldn't think so.
People make mistakes, and some of the mistakes are pretty bad. But then you can do teshuvah. If you're basically good, you can do teshuvah. Correct yourself.
Right. But what does it mean a good person doesn't become bad? What is that even supposed to mean? The Gemara asks in this, but does a righteous man indeed not become wicked? Like what? Why is it written, and when a righteous man turns away from his righteousness and practices corruption, this verse from Ezekiel, all his righteousness that he had done will not be remembered. What is this supposed to mean? We see that a person who is always righteous can become wicked. The Gemara answers, that verse refers to a person who was originally wicked. Such a man, after repenting, may one day go back to becoming evil. So he started off evil, became good, then he goes back to being evil. But someone who was righteous from the start will not become evil. Now, this is starting to touch on to the foundations of faith. This is starting to touch on to, like, 1 second, is it nature or nurture? Are you born? Yeah, I mean, a situation, right? Think about it. Like, what is the definition of evil? Like, an evil person, how do you have an evil person? Are people born hating? Are people born Are people born evil? Okay, so if they're taught to kill Jews, let's think about that for a second. So if they're taught to kill Jews, we're bringing here a guy to speak in a few months in the show. Kasim Hafiz is his name. He's an anti-Jewish, like a terrorist. He's a terrorist who saw the light and changed his ways. We had a Nazi skinhead here. Remember Frank Mink? He was a Nazi skinhead from south side of Chicago, I think he was. No, Philly, south side of Philly. And he said that he actually saw the light. He discovered that he was actually Jewish, according to his story. And Sippy here is posting, Yetzer Ha'adam Rami Neurav. Interesting. She's bringing up this week's Torah portion, where it says about God, initially, in last week's Torah portion, people lived like 900 years. And then at the very end of last week's Torah portion, it says that God saw that the inclination of man is evil from his very earliest youth, and therefore we can't give them so much time. We can't allow them to live that much time because they're gonna go sour. So we're gonna cut down their age to 120 years. So that's what Sippy's bringing up. So what exactly is this supposed to mean? The Gemara challenges this answer as well. Indeed, he will not. So you're going to tell me that it was only a person that originally started off as evil, that became good. That's the person that's going to go back to being evil. But somebody who was born good, whatever that means, right? Somebody who has started off good, he's never going to go bad. You brought up an example of somebody who you said was taught to hate. Okay, so he's taught to hate. So that's how I brought up my examples to say they were taught to hate, and then they can see the light later on. Unless we're talking about nurture. Maybe this is talking about nurture. That if you were raised in an environment of hatred, then maybe that's the person that we're talking about that was evil, whereas Shmuel was raised in a nurturing environment of positivity, and maybe that's what we're talking about. I don't know. We're going to dive into this. Let's see. The Gemara challenges this answer as well. Indeed, will he not become evil? Somebody who was good, whatever that means, won't become evil. Why we learned in the Mishnah, do not believe in yourself. This is from Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 2. Don't ever become complacent. Don't believe in yourself to the point that you will never stray, you'll never corrupt your faith, because that you will not sin until the day you die. For Rabbi Yochanan the Kohen Gadol served as high priest, Kohen Gadol, for 80 years. You know what it means that he served as high priest for 80 years? It means that he passed the acid test every year on Yom Kippur, entering into the Holy of Holies without a single straight thought, nothing insincere, nothing inauthentic. He was able to enter in peace and emerge in peace from the Holy of Holies. For 80 years, he was sincere. And in the end, he became a Sadducee. Anybody know what a Sadducee is? A Sadducee is a student of Tzadok. Tzadok in Hebrew is Tzadokim. Tzadok was one of the rabbinical students at the time who decided to start his own brand of religion with his friend Baitos. And these two, Tzadok and Baitos, they decided to basically start the origins of Reform Judaism, where they would say that the rabbis, we don't believe in the rabbis, we only believe in the written Torah, we don't believe in the explanations of the rabbis, and we choose to interpret it how we want. So they basically went after a written Torah version of Judaism, rejecting an oral Torah commentary of Judaism, right? So, they started their own brand, which is basically what Reform is, because the Reform is doesn't really accept the Talmud. They just accept the written Torah and they interpret it as they wish, right? So Anabaya said, he is Yanai, he is Yochanan. In other words, Yanai and Yochanan is the same person. Yochanan, the high priest, is also Yanai. Yanai is the same person. What does that mean? Let's take a look at the note number 6. Yanai and Yochanan were members of the Hasmonean dynasty. The Hasmoneans were the kings of the Maccabees in the Hanukkah story, who had conquered the Greeks and drove them out of the land, and they appointed themselves as kings. So they were the descendants of Matisyahu, of the Maccabee family, and they this is who Yanai and Yochanan were. The Gemara in Kedushin says that King Yanai massacred the sages for questioning whether he was fit to serve as high priest. Abaya holds that Yanai and Yochanan are the names of the same person, who was known by both names. So the king who massacred the sages for questioning his eligibility to serve as high priest is the same person as Yochanan, who served as high priest. That is, after killing the sages, he repented right at the end of his life. After serving as high priest for 80 years, he became a Sadducee. According to the Vilna Gaon, he was John Hyrcanus, the son of Shimon HaMaccabee. Okay, so what do we see? Abaye said he's Yanai as Yochanan. Yanai is the same person as Yochanan, which means that Yanai became an evil Sadducee after having been Yochanan, who was a holy high priest. How then can you say that somebody who was started off good can't become bad? The Mishnah says it exactly the opposite. The Mishnah says, don't ever become complacent in your faith. Don't until the day you die, because you could stray just like Yochanan the high priest did. Rav, however, said Yanai and Yochanan were two separate people. Yanai was wicked from the start, but Yochanan was righteous from the start until the end of his life when he became a Sadducee. So according to Rav, it's two different people. So we've got a lot of questions to understand over here, okay? A lot of questions, and we still back to our original question. Let me just fill in some commentary. I'm going to go back to page 300. I'm going back to page 300. I want to see some of the notes. We said the story started with Rabbi Gamliel, who asked who can make a prayer for the heretics. Why did he need to do that? Because the heretics were making the Jewish people's lives miserable. These self-loathing Jews would report the observant Jews, the traditional Jews, to the authorities, and they would make their lives miserable. So they needed to make a prayer to cut them down spiritually, right? So Shmuel was the one who instituted the prayer. Why would he have forgotten it? So let's see note number 23. Okay, the Gemara drives the order of the blessings of the Shemona Esrei from the verses. This order was arranged by Ezra and the men of the Great Assembly. Over the years, however, the order was forgotten, and Shimon the cotton merchant restored this order. So what happened was, when the Jewish people went into the Babylonian exile, so the first temple was destroyed, 586 BC. There they were in Babylon for 7 years. Babylon was conquered during that time by Persia, and that's where the Purim story happened. By the time they came back to Israel in about 2,300 years ago, they had forgotten, they'd fallen spiritually, and they'd forgotten how to pray. So what then happened was that the men of the Great Assembly, led by Ezra and Nehemiah and Mordechai and Esther, they instituted the prayers the way we know them. Judaism was formalized in the Sidur, which means sequence, which is prayer, or the Seder, which is the sequence of the Passover night. So what happened was they instituted formal templates for prayer, but that sequence was forgotten until this time, a few hundred years later, when Rabban Gamliel asked in the academy after the destruction of the second temple, what is the order of prayer? And that's when this conversation begins. Rambam writes, in the days of Rabban Gamliel, the heretics increased in Israel. They distressed Israel and the court incited them to abandon God. When Rabban Gamliel saw that this need to be free of the heretics was greater than all the other needs of the people, he and his court arose and established a blessing that would contain a request for God to destroy these heretics. He instituted it in the prayer in order that all would be fluent in it. Now, obviously, we've never found the need to make this prayer unnecessary because, unfortunately, we've always had self-hating Jews amongst our people for 2,000 years since this prayer was instituted. I believe that those self-hating Jews are a test, folks. Are a test to us. So instead of shooting the messenger and getting all bent out of shape about how can a Jew believe this, that, or the other, I believe that God is controlling the world. And I believe that God is testing us by giving us all sorts of emotional stimuli to scare the living daylights out of us so that we can have no choice but to fall in our faith. Rob, you okay with that? That's what I think.
Not sure.
Okay, fine. This is good. Shmuel Hakatan was over 80 years old when he composed this blessing. A heavenly voice had once proclaimed that Shmuel Hakatan was worthy of having the presence of the divine of the Shekhinah rest upon him, but his generation was not worthy of this, the divine presence. Each word contained in this new blessing had to be examined and weighed. For this task, it wasn't just anybody that could write text for this prayer. It needed to be a divine template, and that's why Shmuel Hakatan was solicited to do this great composition. Okay, let's keep on going. Let's take a look at the quick note over here at the bottom, inside F bottom, page 300. Each word contained in the other 18 blessings of the Shemona Esrei was also carefully examined and weighed. Even the amount of words contained in each blessing is not random. This is our silent Amidah, but was carefully counted by the men of the Great Assembly. It certainly took the effort of the great sages to clothe hidden, esoteric meanings within the simple meaning of every letter and word contained in each blessing. Undoubtedly, it took men endowed with great spirit, divine spirit, to invest these words with the power to bear influence in the heavenly spheres. The lofty task of arranging these blessings was no small matter. Nevertheless, we do not find that special effort was expended to find one uniquely suited individual to formulate those blessings. So why did Rabbi Gamliel have to search for one person who knows how to institute the blessings of the heretics? And why, of all the greats who lived in that area, was it specifically Shmuel Hakatan who was chosen to do so? By the way, this is a very interesting observation of you, because I often tell people they should pray in English. That's only the first step of prayer. You should pray in English because if you don't know what's flying, then you should understand what's flying. But bear in mind that the Hebrew has code. So once you've learned to understand the English, that's only the first level, and you never want to stay at the first level. You want to be able to graduate to level 2, 20, 2000. So what I want you to do, to consider, is that after you've understood the blessing, try to learn the Hebrew. Try to write, buy yourself a siddur and write the translation, or buy the linear siddur where you can see the Hebrew and the English words against each other. So as you read the Hebrew word, you can see the English translation. Because when you read the original Hebrew, there's all sorts of spiritual energies and codes that are contained within the letters that obviously cannot be translated to another language. So for example, if you have an email address, I use this example. If you have an email address and you want to translate it to another language, what's going to happen? You will understand what's going on. It would be Rabbi Vigler at whatever Jewish Garden, Rabbi at JewishGardens.com. We'd be like, oh, this is an email address. It's the rabbi's email address at an organization called JewishGardens.com. Great, right? But it's not actually working yet, because you're aware of what's going on. You're smelling the roses, but you're not actually using it yet. When you use the original, you can't send that in Hebrew and say Rabbi at ganyehudi.com. I mean, that's not going to get you anywhere, right? But if you do it in the original format, the code, and you say, okay, now that I know what an email address is, now that I know who I'm talking to, I'm going to send the original email in English, so that it will get to the destination. Now you know what I'm talking about. So this is the secret of the 18 blessings. First level is, stage 1 is to understand what's going on and who you're talking to. But once you've graduated that level, keep on moving forward. Don't give up. And I want to encourage you, if you're davening the whole Amidah and you're not ready for this, take one line. Take the first line of the Amidah and say it in the original Hebrew. Take one line, right? Take one paragraph of the Amidah. Slow it down. There's no rush. Where you're running to. Slow it down. Make one line in Hebrew. And if you could do that, you're doing the original code. Let's keep on going. So why was Shmuel Hakatan chosen, and why did he forget his own composition? Anyone with an eloquent pen can find the appropriate words for an expressive prayer, but few people are so humble, selfless, and pure that they can author the prayer completely for the sake of heaven without any trace of ulterior motives. You need somebody who's free from all ego. And since this particular blessing, meant to be recited by all Jews 3 times a day, was tantamount to an open declaration of war against the Jewish heretics, there was a danger that all kinds of insincere people and unholy sentiments, hitherto restrained by the quiet of peacetime, would now emerge from the shadows and wreak havoc under the pretense of fighting a holy war to defend all that Jews hold sacred and dear. To avert this danger, it was necessary to find someone who could establish this prayer and issue its call to arms in such a high-minded way that it would arouse only the best in those reciting it, and more importantly, to arouse God to intervene on the side of those fighting for his honor. So let me ask you a question. If I put out a proposal today and I said, I'm looking for someone to write a prayer. We have elections in a few days' time. I'm looking for somebody to write a prayer that all the Jews should vote for the right candidate. Okay? Now, imagine I just asked anybody with an eloquent pen or keyboard to be able to put together that prayer. You know what's going to happen. It's going to be a nightmare because whoever's chosen is going to make a prayer which is associated with their particular interpretation of this election, and who the Satan in this election is, and who the angel in this election is, because you got 2 versions of that story, right? So what you really need to do is to have somebody who is so intensely transparent before God, somebody that has so essentially no ego, that they will be the ones to be able to draft a prayer that is not expressive of their own ulterior motives as much, but rather is fully expressive, wholly expressive, holy with a W and holy without a W, expressive of the true intention of God Almighty. And I'll tell you something. In my prayer, I often pray to God and I say, God, I pray that I see the fulfillment of your truest intention. Because not always do what we think is good for us is actually good for us. So I'll sometimes pray that God should give me the fulfillment of God's truest intention, because you have to try to remove your ego from the equation in order to experience the momentum of the blessing. So this is now we're beginning to understand why it was Shmuel Hakatan. What does Hakatan mean? What does Katan mean? Small. They called him Shmuel Hakatan, Shmuel the small. Why do you think they called him Shmuel Hakatan? Because he was short? You think they called him Shmuel because he was young? Or do you think they called him Shmuel Hakatan because his ego was, in the 6th Torah portion in Parshas Noach, we read about the descendants of Noach at the end of the portion. And one of them had an extraordinary amount of children, much more than everybody else. And Rashi says, why did this guy have much more kids than everybody else? Says Rashi, because his name was Yaktan. Yaktan means makes himself small.
Humility.
Katan, Yaktan, it's the root of Katan, small, humility. Because he made himself small. Because he made himself small, that's why he merited to experience God's speed in his life, right? When you have ego, you're blocking the light of God shining through you. But when you're humble, you're transparent. God's light is able to shine through you. That's when you're making money. That's when the health is flowing freely. That's when the kids are fertile and successful, and they're giving you nachas, Yiddish and Chassidish nachas. It's amazing, right? Good. So now let's just see this in the text. Was there indeed such an exalted human being amongst the sages of the time? Bottom of page 300. This was the question that Rabbi Gamliel put to his colleagues. Who is worthy? Not who can write. Not who has a few free minutes to draft a prayer. The question was, who is worthy? And the answer was emphatically yes. Yes. There was a Shmuel Hakatan, the little, who earned this epithet by doing all that he could to make himself small, to hide his greatness and avoid all forms of honor, and was eulogized upon his death with the unusual lament. Alas, what a humble man he was! Alas, what a pious man he was! A disciple of Hillel the elder, who was likewise noted for these virtues. What an interesting eulogy he got, that he was a disciple of Hillel, who was also exceedingly humble. As a man of deep humility, Shmuel Hakatan was not given to thinking about himself when acting on behalf of his creator. But even more to the point, this officer in Hashem's army had long emphasized the need for pure-minded, dispassionate opposition to sinners. No ego. In fact, the Mishnah partially sums up this virtual legacy of Shmuel Hakatan with a quote from Mishlei Proverbs that he was accustomed to repeating: when your enemy falls, do not be glad. And when he stumbles, let your heart not be joyous, lest Hashem see and it displease him, and he turn his anger from him to you. You know what this is called in English? There's actually a word for this. A word that only the Germans could have invented. Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude means taking pleasure in the pain of another. That's what Shmuel Hakatan was saying. You know what's going to happen next week on when the election results come out? I don't know. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I don't know, whenever they come out. There's going to be, God forbid, there'll be some Schadenfreude. Ha! We got you. I told you. Shmuel's so devoid of ego. He's so void of ego that he's like, look, when you're expressive of God's truth, you don't take pleasure in the fall of others. You're a warrior for God. You're not intimidated by anybody else. You're not afraid of anybody else. That's why guys, I say to you, don't get excited about the elections. Don't get excited. Hashem is in control. The master of the universe. Don't ever get afraid. I think you should get excited. Yeah. And you should go vote. It's very important. But don't ever become afraid, because a Jew is never afraid. Yes, sir. What's your question?
We're hypocritical here.
We're hypocritical here.
Over the last several months, we take great joy when Israel has victories.
That's an interesting question.
We showed a video here of one of the drones taking out 4 individuals, and people applauded, and they yelled, and they screamed, and they were joyous.
That's a very interesting question.
Are we not following this thing?
So I would think perhaps that the difference is, in case my online viewers here didn't hear the question. Yeah. So Chuck is asking the same question. Does this mean don't pleasure in the pain of others apply to terrorists as well? Right? I would think, this is my opinion, okay, that perhaps when somebody's trying to kill you, it's different to somebody who has a different view from you. So when somebody just shares a different position from you, you're Trump and they're Kamala, or you're Democrat, Republican, you're pro-abortion, and that. But if it's a matter of existential threat, perhaps it is different. Look, I'm probably not in the level of Shmuel Hakatan, I guess, right? I mean, this is an amazing, amazing level to reach. When you study Talmud, it's awesome. When you realize, like, whoa, let's just think for a moment what just happened. Think about, when they say about someone, he was a good person. Think about that for a second. What does that actually mean? He was a good person. Well, what do you mean by that? That means he helped old ladies cross the street. What does that mean? Look at this aspiration and this value that we've just been introduced to. The man had no ego. Do you know anybody who has no ego? This is Chuck's question online. Do you know one person that has no ego besides Donald Trump? I'm joking. No, seriously. Do you know one person that has no ego? Seriously. What an amazing aspiration. Rob, I'm a little unsure of how to answer your question. I'm just saying this to you, okay? Because I think it's a very, very good question. Perhaps, what would Shmuel Hakatan do is my question. What would he do? Would he rejoice in the fall of terrorists?
American football, NFL, follows his directive.
Really? How does that work?
Because they have a penalty
for
against taunting.
Taunting? You're not allowed to jeer? You're allowed to cheer? You're not allowed to jeer?
No, when you're a player on the field and you're not allowed to taunt someone because you did better than them in a certain
Players can't do that? Are spectators allowed to do that?
Yes.
Because anti-Semitism in the stands I've seen, it's pretty... Do they get ticketed for that or no?
The NFL follows his...
Interesting. Well, that's good to know. Look, I don't know. My question to your question is, what would Shmuel Hakatan say about the fall of terrorists? I suspect that perhaps he would celebrate the fall of our enemies. I mean, listen, he wrote the prayer. He wrote the prayer about the fall of the existential threat to the Jewish people, which was a spiritual threat. Yes, Jacob the Jew, you may ask a question. Yes, so I'm answering by saying I'm not sure. Go ahead.
Well, I would think that it would apply to the Jewish people. That the enemies amongst the Jewish people, the heretics among the Jewish people, that our enemies are not Jewish people. They are, as you say, existential enemies of the Jewish people. And I think, we are commanded many times in the Torah to kill those who are coming to kill us, to remember Amalek. So I think it's two entirely separate.
So it applies only to us, not to outsiders.
So you're saying, so what you're differentiating here, Elaine, is to say that when it comes to, you're not supposed to celebrate the fall of your Jewish enemies, but the fall of your existential enemies, which would be outside of the Jewish faith. You could celebrate. By the way, I was criticized here by a viewer from California when the beeper bombs happened. The day after the beeper bombs, I was excited. I was happy that these terrorists were struck in such a precision strike. And I got an email from one of our viewers in California who criticized. He says, you're not supposed to gloat in the fall of our enemies. And I said, I disagree with you. Because what do you do when you say the word Haman? Is that not gloating? Is that not gloating? When it comes to our existential threat, we use the Gregor. We want to make sure everybody knows that we're happy.
You should never cheer when you win.
Why not?
You should never cheer.
You should never cheer when you win. Is that a fact?
When you win, because you're glory.
Okay, it's interesting. Brenda says something here very interesting. She says, she's bringing up something very interesting. Very interesting question she's bringing up. She says that when the Jewish people were crossing the Red Sea and the Egyptians were drowning and the Jewish people were surviving, the angels were celebrating. And God criticized the angels. Why are you celebrating the fall of my creations? That's a very interesting question. Why are you celebrating? Now, these Egyptians were Nazis. Okay, these Egyptians were were jihadists who were trying to enslave the Jewish people, murder their children. I mean, this is a genocidal people. And God is telling the angels not to celebrate. This is very interesting. This is real Talmudic discussion, guys.
Well, isn't there a distinction between literally celebrating, which is, being happy and glorifying, versus having now protected yourself and saved yourself and your people, but still feeling I had to murder someone to do that? Those, to me, that's a big distinction. It's one thing throwing a party, we're going to throw a party because we wipe these people out, versus saying we had to wipe these people out. I had to kill someone. I had to murder someone. It happens. I had to murder someone. I still feel bad that I had to murder that person because they were a human being, and maybe they could have been different. Maybe I could something, but I had to murder them.
Right. So you're saying the difference.
It's a distinction.
Yeah, but we celebrated also.
I got it.
So there's a clash of here with how we treat Haman and how God responds to the angels. It's a very interesting clash. So Harvey's trying to differentiate by saying that there's gloating, which might not be okay, versus a practical self-preservation need. But you're not celebrating. You're just praising God, so to speak, for having removed the threat.
Theoretically celebrating.
Theoretically, I mean, it's a very fine line here. Let me see what Jacob the Jew has to say. Eich ata margish legabe goyim shemitzchot. Okay, I can't read your English. I'm sorry. He wrote it in like Hebrew English letters. I can't read that right now. Sorry. If you can translate that, great. But I just can't read your translation right now. So let me leave it right now with a question. Okay. I would like to think about this a little bit more, but let's just finish the paragraph. We are a little bit over time. Let me just see about how to finish this up. Okay. Clearly, this was the composer that Rabbi Gamliel was looking for. Here was someone who could represent Israel before Hashem with a completely altruistic request for divine condemnation of the heretics. Rabbi Yochai Meisel is a leading rabbinic figure in Poland, was at the forefront of the battle against the attacks on traditional Judaism by the Maskilim. These Maskilim were the free thinkers, the Enlightenment movement. In his eulogy of this great man, Rabbi Yechezkel Lefshitz bemoaned the loss of a man who battled against his own soft nature and the love of his fellow man in order to wage a fierce war for true Judaism. He took no pleasure in fighting this war. On the contrary, his heart ached with each battle. He felt forced to wage against a fellow Jew. Like Shimon Hakatan in the times of the Mishnah, these are the generals who must guide us even today in our spiritual wars for the sake of heaven. Maybe that's the difference. The difference is, why are you fighting this war? Are you fighting it because of your own ego, or are you fighting it because you're fighting Milchamis Hashem, the wars of God? And maybe you can apply that to the celebration as well. Are you celebrating because your own ego prevailed, or are you celebrating because God's will was fulfilled? Right? It's a very interesting distinction. Let's continue. We'll carry on this subject because we're in the middle of a story, folks. Don't forget, we are in a story about how to deal with the self-hating Jews, right? How we pray for their downfall. Is there something? Why did Shmuel Hakatan forget the prayer? We didn't even get to that answer yet. And we also have to understand what it means, why they didn't remove him from the post, why they felt that there was no chance of him himself having become a heretic, because a good man will never become bad. We remove a drop of wine at the Seder. We're noting each of the 10 plagues. Okay, so that's it's not a celebration, it's an observation. Either way, lots of good stuff going over here. Let's see a comment coming in from the trucker. Have to say, absolutely loved your saying about Hebrew lama. That lama in Hebrew means why, but the rabbis translated it not as why, but lema, for what? Totally stolen. The rabbi was impressed. Oh, you stole it. Oh, you good. Very nice. You quoted me. Very good. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll continue this fascinating conversation.